Hello, this is Speculative ASMR. I hope that your morning, afternoon, evening, or nighttime is going well. It is night where I'm at. It's a very warm night. We usually don't get nights this warm in April, but we're getting treated. Little taste of summer. Where I live, summer did not come until June last year. And usually you get it in May, but it was not a real summer until June. And so this little treat in April I've really been enjoying. But we're talking about something less beautiful than the weather tonight. We're talking about austerity. And so settle in. If you want to space out about these concepts, go for it. If you want to tap in, I'm here with you as well, because it's a concept that I've learned about, over a course of time, but this book really illuminated a lot to me. It's the capital order, how economists invented austerity and paved the way for fascism. I really, really thought this book was enlightening. It's a history book about austerity, which we'll get into what that is, but it uses the UK and Italy. The UK being considered, a liberal democracy, never quite falling into fascism as we know it in the 20th and 21st century. And then Italy, which obviously had Mussolini and their whole fascism thing, and, fascism globally seems to be taken off, but I know Italy and UK, it's all, but it also gets, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. But basically, it shows that even what you would think of as a liberal democracy has these nuggets of fascism, and they both kind of work in a lockstep because they're both capitalist systems, and fascism is basically just this emergency capitalism that creates the capital order, or that reinforces the capital order and the production of capital. And this is often done through austerity. And that's getting ahead of myself a little bit, and also a little bit off track, because I really do want to get into what this is so we can just understand this. And then if you're interested, I imagine it's a university press book. And so I know these are sometimes a little bit sparse, but I got this as a book fair, only $10, steal of the lifetime, but I'm sure it's sold on their website, so it's definitely worth the read. I'm gonna get into some things I've set up before we get into the book. I've given sort of a list of austerity and its definition, so we can just kind of plug and play into this one section of the book where she really digs into how the different versions of austerity start to interplay and how the system works. So I'm going to put this to a side for a minute, and then we're going to get into what I've written. Be kind to my handwriting. I am not a master penman in any regard. So the first thing I want to define is what austerity is, because I keep saying that word, but what does that mean? And so I took some stuff from Merriam-Webster, and I also infused my own and some things from the book. And everything here I'm drawing from the book, but unless I'm reading from it, I'm not directly quoting. I'm summarizing it in my own language, because I think that's how I've been taught best in my life. Sort of the teacher as a medium between me and the content, and then I can go and see what it says myself, and then to form my own relationship. So this is what I'm going to do for this, even when we talk about that. So basically, here, I'm going to zoom in a little bit now, and then I'll zoom in more when we get to the book. Basically, austerity is the state of being austere. And look at this, my handwriting terrible. A stern and serious quality. And so I included that because I think this is an important thing to understand from the beginning. Its definition outside of economic terms is to be stern and serious. And I think that's reflected in the way that it materializes as policy rather than just a definition. And so the actual, economic definition is extreme economy on a national scale. And so what that means is the layman's term I would use is chintzy. It's very cheap. It's pocket cheap in the sense it pocket watches the working class. That's something we'll get into. But that's kind of what it means by extreme, is that everything tightens up. It becomes stern and serious. And the book uses a lot of examples that we might get to, but it is understood, and I'm just using examples basically. Spending cuts, tax changes, regulation, and the regulation is mostly deregulation. Or it's, we'll get to it, but it's usually not, or rare. It's not working class friendly. It's not anybody but the people willing and able to have enough money to save, and then of course the business owners. And that's what I'm getting to. Purpose served. And this is the book. This is also very much the book is telling us this. To enforce capital accumulation when economic conditions stray. And the example used is that during World War II, because everybody needed to be working on the war effort in the UK particularly, during World War One, there became sort of a collectivism. And also during both the World Wars, but it kind of goes over a lot of different things. But there was a need for collectivist production in the sense that the whole nation was working towards a project. And that's not usually necessarily capitalism's whole shebang. The industry, of course, they were all working on was like military and things for fighting. But usually it's, all for all. Whoever has a thing to sell, it's their own private interest versus everybody working together on a project. I could get into that a lot, but that's kind of what broke down a lot of the social barriers in the UK. That's an example that she uses in the book. But that's what austerity is. It's basically a set of policies and movements that create an extreme economy that is meant to tighten back up the accumulation of capital. And so I'm going to get into the different ways that kind of manifests. And so these are kind of half definitions because I'm defining what they are, but not quite how they manifest in austerity. Some ways of austerity, but I just thought it'd be better to kind of get the three definitions that she uses as well. 1 second, I'm going to drink water. Excuse me. Okay, so fiscal. What fiscal means in this case, these are all kind of prefixes or adjectives to austerity, but what fiscal austerity means is this is more what fiscal means, but then it all connects to the austerity obviously, but how government money is spent and collected. And so that's what fiscal is that's the budget of the government, the pockets, but it's also how, like, tax rates, how that money is collected. And so that's sort of the movement of money through the vehicle of government. And so that's welfare, that's tax rates on certain brackets. And so this is money spent and money collected. Then monetary is how money is circulated and regulated. I also put unregulated by banking institutions. Actually, this would be less on regulation because they have a vested interest in current, always kind of changing it. So it's less of a, it's more like constant change, I feel like, the way the book describes it. But basically, the money we have is backed by global and national banking systems. And so our money is monitored and backed by these institutions, and so they have the power to affect interest rates, credits, and I underline banks again because this is what it is. It's the way the banking system can affect the circulation to, like, affect prices or credit, and basically it's the policy on money. This is how the money is collected and spent. This is the policy on the money itself. And so the examples she uses are how the UK had a vested interest in establishing banking institutions as soft power, because it was able to so effectively through this, I'm getting ahead of myself, but through this monetary austerity, so in a certain amount effectively able to boost its own budget, and not even boost its own budget, to continue the process of capital accumulation that they felt would ensure the country's power. And so they had that system, and they were like, this is great. This financial capital is so freaking awesome. Like, we just need to spread these banks everywhere and have our dollar have as much power as possible. And so that's monetary. And industrial, this is the most straight up to me. Rules and regulations in the workplace is how I defined it. And so this is whether you can, this is union rules, this is strike rules, this is workers' rights. And as you can imagine, when they were working, I live in America, what workers' rights here, we don't got those here. But we're also not really working in the factories that much. I don't, and most of the population doesn't, especially compared, to 50, 60 years ago. And so, but they were working in the factories. Like, it was the war, it was, all these things. And so, especially in Italy, there was the communists in Italy, and there was the unions in Italy, and there was even these descriptions of how they took over workplace, and how these workplaces kind of became more of a place for real co-op, and it was life versus, how capitalism does it. And so, yeah. So, this is sort of the preamble, 12-minute preamble into what we're getting into today. And so, I'm going to switch out to the book. I hope that makes sense. I have a tendency I'll have the end thought I want to have, but I feel like the end thought needs describing. So I will start at the end thought of what I'm trying to get to, and then I'll add a bunch of preamble instead of like leading up to the end thought. And so I'm just crazy like that. Okay, so I'm going to read some of these things, and then I will switch to this. So there's going to be some zooming in, zooming out here, and I'm going to zoom even more in so we can read this with me. So this is all this page. Sorry. Actually, let me zoom back out. So this page was really fantastic to me in this book because it's, this big history book. In a certain amount, it's obviously an academic book that's trying to make a point about a concept, which is austerity. But it also has this wonderful page where it describes the motion of austerity from one another and how it manifests itself in different ways that all contribute to basically an assault on the working class, which is most of, recent history. But, and just to give you more perspective before we jump into this, I think something really important that is said in the book is that, and also, I didn't say her name because I got scared that I wouldn't get the last name right. I should have looked it up, but it's Clara Mattei, the capital order. But basically, a lot of this stuff is enforced by banking institutions, the government, and it's by these people who are kind of like technocrats, which is basically a belief in their own um, ability in the economy. They're economists, and so they believe in the free market, the invisible hand. Like, it's all these things. They basically make these constant appeals. Like, these are the people who institute austerity in this book, are people who constantly make appeals to the free market and the rules of all these things, and how people just need to spend less, and you just gotta watch your pocket. And it's so funny because they act like there's nothing, like, they act like this capitalism thing needs to be the Wild Wild West, but in order to make it this laissez-faire, very high amount of capital accumulation, no workers' rights, the dollar's all weird, the spending's all bad for everybody but rich people, like, there has to be such direct intervention by the government, by these, and beside, and in this, I might as well have done a whole summary on the whole book, but in this book, like, it even phrases how the banking institutions of these governments became their own private motive, and they were blocking out the Secretary of Treasury, and they were doing all these, things independent of even of their own government, because they felt so strongly that their economic entitlement, their entitlement to shape the economy, to be anti-working class and to be pro, big bucks, in order to be competitive. And in some ways that's a situation they're in, but they get really into it. I almost want to take a second and look up these guys' names just to slander them, because it's just real rude behavior to me. Especially these two dudes in Britain. I'll maybe look it up and show it at the end, but okay, let's get into this. Fiscal austerity takes the form of budget cuts, especially welfare cuts and regressive taxation. Both reforms allow the transfer of resources from the majority of citizens to the minority, the saving investing class, as so to secure property relations and greater capital formation. Meanwhile, the budget cuts also curtail inflation through two main mechanisms. First, the reduction and consolidation of public debt diminishes the liquidity in the economy, since debt holders can no longer use maturing bonds as means of payment. Second, budget cuts reduce aggregate demand. The general public has less disposable income, and the state itself is investing less. Less demand for goods and capital means the internal prices are kept down. Moreover, such stifling of aggregate demand also increases the foreign value of the currency by discouraging imports and thereby improving the balance of trade. Indeed, the foreign value of currency is favorable if the balance of trade of a country is favorable. And so that's a lot of things that I'm not even going to touch on. But there are things I'd like to talk about. So, fiscal to monetary. And basically what this means is that budget cuts means that the debt of a country goes down. And that means people also have less welfare down and have to spend more of their own money on their wage. And so basically this debt, welfare down, and spending more money affects the monetary because of honestly, I'm a little bit confused on the exact transfer here, but I feel like it's explained in the next section. So I'm just going to go on the next section because I think that speaks better than I will. But I hope that made sense. Like, they fiscally, they change spending patterns to stern, to be serious, basically. Okay. Monetary austerity to fiscal austerity. Monetary austerity, or monetary deflation, entails curtailment of credit in the economy and primarily coincides with a rise in interest rate. This so-called dear money policy, in which money is harder to come by, increases the cost to the government of borrowing money and thus limits the expansionary project. In the 20th century history, the limit to state expenditure becomes more entrenched once the gold standard is reestablished. In order to maintain gold parity, the avoidance of capital flight takes precedent. Hence, fiscal policy has to prioritize retaining capital in its economy. It does so by minimizing government expenditure and creating capital-friendly environment via lower taxation on capital. And so this is where I feel like you start getting into it. That first one, sometimes the monetary stuff is hard for me, but I think that's where we kind of got that first oomph of where, oh no, did I get purple on my, no I didn't, okay, sorry. That's where we start to get our first hint of where this kind of all leads, because monetary austerity, because credit, there's credit, the amount of credit you could do. I guess the credit's connected to the debt, probably. And there's, the real money in circulation. Circulation. Sorry, I do not write well, but you can imagine what I wrote. But because credit is less available, all the people who already have money, who are the savers and the investors and the people with, could be petty bourgeois, it could be just straight up the capitalists or landlords or whoever, the people who are able to pocket away money and who also didn't have to worry about the welfare cuts that we mentioned before. It allows them, capitalist. She calls it the saver / investor, but I guess it wouldn't always be the capitalist though, because it is like certain, middle class. Like it's hard because she's talking about 20th century relations, and I'm in the 21st century in America. So, but basically the people who can sock money away, whether they have a lot of it or not as much, but they definitely have more than the people working in the factories. And so that's kind of what all that meant, is that credit, when less money is available to access, the people who already have it are at an advantage. And the government is all cheeky and nice to them because they're trying to get capital accumulation going. And so they're all nice and they are giving low taxes to these people. And sounds a little bit like right now. Just to give you some perspective in America, the one big beautiful bill. I should do a video on that. I might actually. The one big fugly bill. Gave permanent tax cuts to quote unquote high earners, and then gave temporary half measure tax cuts that have to be revoted on to anybody who wouldn't be wealthy in the first place. So this is, I should do a video about that, but this is us, this is them 100 years ago and different. We're across the ocean and, same old rigmarole. And this is just in America too. I mean, this is what people face in countries that can even play this, capitalism game. And so this is the horrors that you face kind of within countries like UK, Italy, and America. But, it's so strange how there ranges from these economic horrors and labor horrors, and these happen everywhere. But then sometimes they manifest much more violently for other countries. Basically, I'm saying this is the internal dilemma of capitalism, and then how it externalizes to places that it does not consider, places where its cultural game can be played. But I'm getting into my own things. Also, sorry if my hands look weird this whole time. I did some yard work, and it gave it a certain kind of activating. But let me continue. Okay. Oh, this is tough. Okay, I'm going to zoom out a little bit. Sorry. It's just... Industrial austerity refers to impositions of industrial peace, i.e. non-contested hierarchies. Such peace is, of course, the basis of capital accumulation, as it secures property rights, wage relations, and monetary stability in the long run. Industrial austerity also guarantees expedient monetary deflation, which makes assets on hand more valuable. In fact, successful reevaluation crucially requires downward price adjustments. Increases the value of money. The increase in value of money. Price adjustments, particularly labor prices. Oh, it's always freaking labor prices, y'all. In order to cut the cost of production. This is because lower production costs keep commodity prices low, thus invert... Oh, okay, here it is. This is what I was getting confused on with the fiscal... I'll explain this. This is because lower production costs keep commodity prices low, thus boosting international competitive... Okay, now I can zoom in. Competitiveness at a moment when a country is seeking to improve its exchange rates through greater exports. Thus, lower production costs are ever more essential to compensate for a loss of competitiveness once the currency is reevaluated, so as not to lose foreign market share. If the state has enough coercive powers, the Italian fascist state did, it can intervene directly to curtail nominal wages through legal action, thus securing immediate downward price adjustment and ensuring the competitive need is to achieve the gold standard. Of course, even in less authoritarian sites, the burden of restrictive labor laws may limit the legitimacy of industrial manipulations. For example, through criminalization, solidarity strike, industrial peace, and wage repression are also important to attract capital and avoid its flight. Another prerogative for gold convertibility. Low wages also can decrease consumption demand, which in turn decreases imports and thus has a positive effect on the exchange rate. All right, I got it. So this is industrial to monetary austerity. And basically, this kind of puts it together for me. But because in the wages, I should have put wages also and my explanation of industrial, but wages are down. Workers' rights are down. And so this means for the people who already have money, saver, investor, but also like capitalist, they, especially if you're directly paying them, the price to make a good, if you already have the money so it doesn't affect you as much, is a lot cheaper because they want to focus on capital accumulation. And so you're able to, if you're Daddy Warbucks, although I think he ends up being chill, right? I can't remember Annie, but you got the big money and things are cheaper to make, and your money is relatively all right. Saver investor, I guess, maybe. No, it wouldn't. She explains as a class. So, but basically, it's cheaper to make your goods. It's cheaper to make money because you don't have to pay as much for the wages. And also, because the wages are lower, and then the same people have the wages are lower, welfare's down. They're not buying as much goods. And so more can be sold internationally because you've this also somehow, we explained it, but like makes the foreign trade value of your money good. It all just comes together, and the people who can either save by having some sort of trade thing going on or investment, and they have enough where the certain effects of austerity, it's not about the welfare for them, it's not about the wages, it's about the cheaper goods, it's about the foreign trade. It all kind of starts to sing together. of how this crunching of people starts to be beneficial to a certain class and the government that works for them. And then this all leads, the fascism part of the book is how the fascism is the direct enforcement of that. But we can keep going, just so this video isn't 8 years long. And so this is kind of just tying it up, I think, with all of these, because the big ones, we've technically gone in a circle. Dear money policy means that the economy will slow down because borrowing becomes costlier and investors are de-incentivized. Once deflation kicks in and prices decline, pessimistic expectations regarding future profits reduce investments further. Less investment means less employment. Higher unemployment not only reduces worker wages, but it also ensures industrial peace, killing political leverage and militancy of labor. Okay, so zoom out again. Monetary to industrial. Basically, because there's less money, there's less jobs. And so workers, less jobs, jobs, less wage, and wages are already low. Wages are low. Less welfare. Like, it's such a mess. It's such a mess. That's what's so tough. But yeah. And so you can just see less money, dear money, makes it so that there's peace, which is just violence. But we can go on to the next one. A weak and docile working class is one whose pressure actions for social measures, progressive tax, and other redistributive policies is subordinate to the austere priorities of shifting resources which favor the saver investor classes. Unions forego radical proposals and practices that challenge private property, are willing to engage in collaboration to increase the efficiency of production in the name of national cause. Basically, same thing. So it's industry to fiscal. Basically, if the working class, if wages down, right down, they cannot enact policy to change that. I mean, they can, but if you don't have any money, if you don't have any power, if you're working, how are you supposed to organize? So basically, means that they can't even go back in and, make a law because they're so crunched, or, do all these things. And so it completely suppresses them. All right, sorry. This again, damn it. Budget cuts means curtailment of public works and public employment, and more generally, leading to an enlargement of the reserve army of labor, which jeopardizes unions' bargaining power and decreases it. Basically, this is the final one, and this one's pretty simple. We know this one. Fiscal. I mean, we've kind of even touched on that. Austerity. To industrial. Austerity, sorry. Basically, if more people need jobs, sorry, I'm not texting right now. If more people need jobs, then it's a lot harder for unions to put their foot down, because you can get anybody to work. And so that's a very that's about it. I hope it all came together That those last three were kind of a, let me zoom out again, are kind of a makeup round, less than the first three. I feel like the first three had a lot of meat to them, but basically when there's less money to go around, just to summarize, industrial, fiscal, monetary, I'll go over here. So when there's less money to go around in the form of credit, in the form of, so this would be mostly, the direct version would be in the form of credit for people who wouldn't usually have it. So when most of the money is already held by people, and money, and the dollar is worth more foreign, right? So that's something that wouldn't affect somebody who is working class necessarily. When the dollar is worth foreign, and then fiscal, when budget cuts, simple quality of life stuff, but mostly welfare. So there's less money, there's less government support, and there's less wage and less worker rights. When there's less of that, these all start to sing in harmony, where because wages are lower, the people who have the money and can trade it foreign, and there's less money, so the people who have it and can trade it foreign can take advantage of the lower wages to start accumulating capital more, because that's where capital starts to come out and you can get more capital. And then if the workers, sorry, I'm just going freewheeling here. If the workers are not into that, they don't even have the government, resources that they pay taxes for, by the way. And then also the government will start to tax the workers more, instead of these people. I keep pointing over there, but capital, capitalists or investor saving class or whoever, isn't being currently squashed. Then there's nothing you can do until something real drastic happens. Global event, workers really coming together, all these things, or the economy just fundamentally shifting. And so it all just comes together to totally screw over most people. And that's about it. I know it was a little rambly, but I partially do this channel to kind of put my ideas together a little bit more, and maybe hope to be a little bit better at speaking. I know it was all over the place still, but thanks for watching with me. I hope that you learned a little bit. I remembered what a lot of this was about because I read it about a month ago. And so have a really good night, y'all.